Golden light laid itself over the Florida coast like a blessing no one had earned, slicking the palms with a gentle sheen and turning the ocean into a sheet of hammered copper. It was the kind of morning that made you forget things broke, or fell apart, or needed fixing. But the Clearwater Resort remembered. Its bones remembered. Hairline cracks hiding behind hurried paint, air conditioners wheezing like tired lungs, elevators that stuck between floors and prayed their way back to life. By late afternoon, the valet stand would shine, the lobby would smell like citrus and money, and the parking lot would look like a luxury car commercial. But at daybreak, you could still hear the building's honest voice, old, proud, a little embarrassed. Malik Johnson liked the early hour best. No guests, only the murmur of custodians, the slap of mop water, the hush of linens folded into parades of white. He would stop on the service catwalk above the ballroom every morning he worked, tray tucked under his arm, and watch the way sunlight sneaked between the drapes and mapped the floor, the way the air pooled in dead corners and never moved, the way load-bearing columns complained just a little when the floor below took on weight. He didn't need a meter to hear it. When you loved a building, you learned its mood the way you learned a person's. By small breaths, by what strained, by what softened. He wore a crisp black vest and a bow tie he tied too neatly to be new to the job. His shoes had been polished so many times the leather had thinned. He kept a golf pencil tucked behind his ear and a packet of cocktail napkins in his pocket. No one had ever told him to carry those napkins. He did it because a mind like his had to set down what it saw, or else the seeing turned into pressure, and pressure turned into a headache that lived behind his eyes all day. He was a waiter. The stories everyone believed about him could fit on a receipt. Southern, quiet, polite, reliable. He spoke when spoken to and moved like water around furniture and moods. People tipped well because he made them feel larger, more sure, like the world arranged itself to their needs just a little faster when he was near. There is a kind of excellence that makes you invisible. Malik understood that better than anyone. By noon, the first black sedans arrived. By 1, Bentleys. By 2, a silver Rolls-Royce that looked like it had found its way to the wrong decade. The Clearwater Resort's board of investors had come to inspect their distressed asset, pick its pockets for salvageable value, or declare time of death and sell the bones to a developer. The ballroom filled with confident laughter and moving targets, men with watches that glowed like small moons, women in dresses that turned as they turned. The place itself, aging and proud, tried to straighten its shoulders. "Champagne, sir?" Malik asked a bald man in a navy suit who looked everywhere but at the person speaking to him. The man lifted the glass without a word, and Malik slid away, a shadow nobody noticed until their drink was low. Across the room, Charles Dwight, the loudest board member and the one who wore arrogance like cologne, was telling the resort manager that the air here felt like a Titanic reenactment with central air. The manager laughed too hard. Malik didn't. He escaped behind the bar when he could, setting his tray on the polished wood, sliding a napkin onto the surface as if setting down a secret. He drew without looking down, the way a pianist plays a song he learned years ago. Angles, arcs, vents where the air could breathe instead of choke. A corridor shifted 3 feet to the east so the ballroom could inhale, a structural brace hidden within a decorative beam. The building began to make sense on paper the way it never had in the mirror. He didn't hear the footsteps until the voice was already at his shoulder. "Yo, Picasso," the voice said, playful and sharp. "Redesigning the bar?" Malik looked up slowly. Tristan Dwight. 20-something, perfect haircut, the kind of smile that didn't need a reason. Behind him gathered a small weather front of wealthy amusement. 4 men, 2 women, and the confidence of a herd. Tristan plucked the napkin and held it up, fingers pinching the corners like it might stain. "You guys have to see this. Our friendly neighborhood waiter thinks he's an architect. Laughter has flavors. This kind was bitter and easy." One of the women, red lacquered nails like arrows, squinted at the drawing. "Those Greek columns," she said. "Is this a jail layout or your dream house?" Malik said nothing. His silence had a shape wide, steady, almost kind. He reached for the napkin and missed it by purpose. Trying would beg. Begging would break him open in a way he refused to tolerate. A lifetime of learning had taught him what to ignore to keep standing. Another lifetime had taught him that sometimes the only way to stay whole was to let people believe what they wanted. On the far side of the room, a housekeeper named Maria watched the scene unfold. She had a gift for reading rooms, the way an argument moved through air, the way kindness found a place to sit down. Her uniform was the color of a clear morning sky. Her hair braided into a crown that looked accidental and perfect. She saw the look on Malik's face when the napkin left his hand. Not fear, not even anger. Containment. A boy who learned early how to pack his heart tight so the world could not bruise it too easily. The resort manager hurried over, scolding the chaos without facing the cause. "Mr. Dwight, our apologies. Please enjoy the tasting in the lounge." Malik, back to the kitchen. The napkin lay crumpled until Malik took it back, folded each crease smooth, and tucked the square into his shirt. Discipline can look like indifference when you don't know what it costs. The next morning, the video went up, Tristan or a friend. The caption, "The waiter who thinks he's an architect." Comments waltzed in with dirty shoes. Malik sat alone in the staff locker room and watched himself become a joke for other people's sport. His phone screen reflected a face he'd grown up learning how to carry. Brown, careful, proud, anyway. A memory rose uninvited. His mother in a yellow dress at the National Innovation Award ceremony, her hands warm around his arm as if she could hold his future steady by heat alone. He put the phone away. He didn't notice Maria until she was already at the doorway, eyes soft but not pitying. "I saw what they did to you," she said. He shrugged like a man who could shrug the weight of a car. "It's fine." "No," she said. "It isn't." She stepped closer, voice changing key. "What were you drawing?" For a heartbeat, he considered lying. A floor plan for the staff party, something small. Truth, though, has a gravity you can't fight forever. He pulled the napkin from his pocket and flattened it on his knee. She bent to look and forgot to breathe. This wasn't doodling. It was a complete re-sketch of a failing building into something that could lift its head again. Airflow corrected by passive ventilation shafts. Traffic flow widened to relieve bottlenecks. Decorative columns modified to carry real load, where the steel had fatigued. Service corridors that moved like rivers, not dead ends. A ballroom softened with sound, baffles disguised as beauty. She lifted her eyes. Were you an architect?" Malik nodded once. "What happened?" she asked, voice small to fit the space where a story could do harm. He closed his hand into a fist and reopened it. "Somebody destroyed my name." He told her in the same quiet way he carried trays, facts laid down carefully so they wouldn't spill. He'd taken a partner he shouldn't have trusted. The man had forged signatures, slapped fake stamps on plans, and pocketed fees while Malik, busy on job sites, measured stairs and sun angles and the distance between promise and delivery. When the scheme collapsed, the partner vanished. The documents didn't lie, and neither did the fingerprints. Malik was indicted, pled to a lesser charge on his public defender's advice, and spent a year where the sky was a narrow rectangle and hope had to be watered daily or it died. By the time he came home, his license was gone and his name was a warning. "I couldn't make a firm hire me," he said, "so I took the job that would hire me." He didn't add, "I also needed quiet work where I could hear a building talk." He didn't have to. Maria heard it anyway. They left it there for the moment. Duty called housekeeping on the 9th floor needed her. Room service needed him. The day needed carrying. By midweek, the resort felt like a pressure cooker someone had forgotten on high. Guest complaints bloomed neon in the manager's inbox. Pipes stalled. The elevator hiccuped. A small patch of plaster gave up and fell like a tired leaf in a hallway. No guest should have been walking through anyway. In a glass-walled conference room at the top of the administrative tower, the executives met with the board. Reports bled red. The word overhaul floated like a balloon on a string no one wanted to hold. The manager's name was Stephen Blake. He had a weary kindness about him, like a teacher who genuinely wants the test to make sense. He didn't laugh at Charles's Titanic joke. He fixed his tie and tried to sound calm. "We don't need to demolish," he said, breath hitching. "We need insight. Someone who understands the bones of this place." "Let me guess," Charles said, not looking up from his tablet. "A miracle architect who falls from the sky." No one in that room knew there was a man on the service catwalk below walking a tray through the air and mentally redrawing the building with every step. The thing about talent is that it needs to move. If you dam it, it pushes. If you smother it, it finds a lint hole and breathes. So that night, after his shift, Malik took a notebook from under his mattress. Its edges were frayed, its cover mended with tape, and inside lived the only place he let himself be as large as he was. Each page was a conversation with material and light. Notes on stack effect, hand-calculated loads, atrium sketches that turned darkness into a lantern. On one page, a photo was taped. Malik in a gray suit, his mother's yellow dress bright as a sunflower beside him. 2 white men from a firm that had courted him. Underneath, in his tidy printing, National Innovation Award, 2011. A knock at the door broke the sanctuary. Maria slipped in with a tray of leftovers grilled chicken, soft bread, a glass bottle of Coke like a treat from childhood. She didn't leave. She sat on the edge of the bunk across from him and waited until he trusted the silence enough to tell it the truth. When he handed her the notebook, she opened it like a sacred text. By the 3rd page, she had put a hand to her mouth. By the 7th, she looked angry for him. "You could save this place," she said. "They'd never let me," he replied. "Then we won't ask permission," she said. "We'll give them a miracle and tell them it came from where they're willing to look." The next afternoon, she intercepted Stephen outside the laundry room. "You said you needed insight," she told him. "I brought you some." She didn't wait for him to answer. She led him to a small office where Malik stood, notebook on the desk, shoulders squared like a man bracing for weather. Stephen flipped pages and forgot to pretend he understood everything. This makes sense," he said, half to himself. "Why didn't our engineers catch—" He stopped. "Where did you learn to do this?" "Howard," Malik said softly. "Master's at Illinois Institute of Technology. 27 completed projects. I lost my license. My partner forged my name. I took a plea. I'm working on getting it back, but a year is a long time when the world keeps moving," Stephen said. He looked out the window toward the service dock, where workers in blue and black uniforms moved like ants with purpose. How would this work? You can hire me as a consultant, Malik said. On paper, someone else presents it. I don't care about credit. I care about getting it right. He did care about credit. He cared in the way an old scar argues with weather, but he also cared about the way a hallway breathes and what happens to a person's chest when the air in a building is good. He cared about the housekeeper who hauled laundry up a stairwell because the service elevator couldn't be trusted. He cared about the maintenance man who listened to pipes as if they could confess. Wanting credit and wanting to help weren't rivals. He had learned to let one talk and hush the other, for now. Stephen's face did something complicated, part calculation, part relief. Let me be plain, he said. The board won't swallow this at first. But they will swallow results, so they built a method. Maria became the courier. She delivered questions and constraints on folded sheets inside a clean linen bag and brought back sketches hidden in the back of a staff menu binder. Stephen presented the solutions to the board as work from an independent consulting firm that preferred a quiet profile. The changes happened in days, then hours, then overnight. Louvered vents installed that redirected sea breezes into hallways. A pilot reconfiguration of the event space that turned dead corners into circulation and increased bookings by 40%. A set of simple braces that relieved sag in a problematic beam. Energy bills dipped. Guest scores climbed. Staff smiled more. Suspicion arrived dressed as curiosity. Charles started asking for names. Stephen smiled like a man with a secret he both enjoyed and feared. Trust the outcomes, he would say. We'll handle the credits once the foundation is solid. In between shifts, Malik and Maria developed a rhythm. They met at odd corners of the property by the laundry chute that everybody forgot, on the back terrace where the ocean pressed its shoulder against the building, in the service corridor that hummed with the white noise of machines. They traded notes and glances in something slower, sweeter, the kind of friendship that grows in the soil of respect. How do you carry anger? She asked him once, leaning beside him on the rail after midnight, the water below a dark breathing. I'd be boiling all the time. I am boiling, he said, but I built a kettle. It whistles. It doesn't explode. She laughed softly and slid her hand near his until their fingers touched. Neither of them pulled away. Of course, secrets draw scavengers. There is always someone who eats off what others know. A waiter named Eli, who liked gossip more than tips, overheard a fragment of a conversation and began to stitch it into a story he could sell. The waiter who thinks he's an architect was somehow behind the changes. It smelled like a rumor that could be monetized. Eli fed it up the chain to someone who fed it to someone who had Charles's ear. That is how, one thick morning heavy with humidity, a senior investor named Halberg arrived unannounced. He was older, his suit classic rather than loud, his eyes interested instead of hungry. I want to know who's responsible for the improvements, he said. Names. Today, Stephen stalled, then failed at stalling. By afternoon, a projector had been rolled into the ballroom. Chairs arranged in a semicircle faced a blank screen. The board members took their places like judges before an audition. In a storage closet, Malik stood in his uniform, staring at his reflection in a dark window. They won't listen to a waiter, he said. Then don't be one, Maria answered. She held out a pressed white shirt and a pair of slacks she had ironed within an inch of their life. Be what you are. He dressed like a man stepping back into a life he had mourned. The shirt fit close across his shoulders. He didn't need a tie. He took his flash drive and a breath and walked toward the ballroom on legs that remembered how to stand tall. The room went quiet the way rooms do when they don't know what they're looking at. Charles recognized him first. "You," he spat, half-laugh. "Our artist." "Gentlemen," Stephen said, standing with a steadiness he had earned. "This is Malik Johnson. He is the mind behind the redesign that's saving this property." Sound climbed in the room, skeptical, derisive, startled. Halberg lifted a hand and silence sat down again. Malik plugged his flash drive into the laptop and filled the screen with a plan that had lived in his head for months. He talked the way he drew, clean, intentional, inviting understanding to sit in the front row. He explained airflow using a story about how a house breathes at night. He mapped structural reinforcements in language that made a man who ran a shipping company nod. He broke down how moving a service corridor changed the tempo of the entire building, how staff and guests could glide rather than collide. He didn't flinch when Charles tried to trip him with jargon. He didn't apologize when his voice caught describing why he cared. "I'm not here for applause," he said at the end. "I'm here because anyone who invests in a building deserves to know who's been holding it up." "That's very poetic," Charles said, leaning back. "But it doesn't change the fact that this man is a convicted fraud." "Accused," Malik said, not raising his voice. "Framed by a partner who forged my name. I pled to stay out longer, to get back faster. It cost me everything." He didn't talk about prison food or the way a guard reads your face when you ask for a pencil. He didn't talk about the quiet that never arrives when the lights never go off. He didn't talk about the day he mailed his license to a state office like a part of his body he was surrendering. He talked about a gift you don't let die. Halberg leaned forward, papers forgotten in his lap. "You created these from memory?" he asked gently. "Yes. With no firm, no software, no license. Just a notebook," Malik said, "and a building that told me where it hurt." Across the back of the room, the door opened. Maria stepped in, out of uniform, her hair a halo. Her voice, when it came, was steady. "What's more dangerous, Mr. Dwight? A man who served time for a crime he didn't commit? Or a man so afraid of black excellence he'd rather tear down a building than admit he needed help from a waiter?" The words landed like a plank over a ditch everyone had pretended wasn't there. No one rushed to defend Charles. Halberg looked from Maria to Malik and then to Stephen. "I want a partnership," he said simply, "if you're willing." Malik swallowed. "On one condition," he said. "I want my name back." The internet loves a redemption arc when it doesn't have to pay for it. The old video resurfaced with new captions. They laughed at the waiter he built the world under their feet. News outlets called. Local stations set up remote cameras outside the resort. The board released a statement that walked like an apology and tried not to trip. "We are proud to announce the appointment of Mr. Malik Johnson as Director of Architectural Redevelopment. Charles resigned to pursue other opportunities. Eli discovered that gossip doesn't pay well when the subject becomes beloved." Work began in earnest. Permits were filed. A licensed supervising engineer signed off on what Malik drew until the appeal of his license could run its course. The atrium he'd dreamed of in the notebook rose in stages, scaffolding up, scaffolding down, light pooling like relief. Hallways were widened not by making them bigger, but by making them make sense. A set of windows that had been painted shut since 1998 opened to coax in ocean breeze. Suddenly, the air smelled like salt and citrus rather than disappointment. Sound baffles disguised as carved wood quieted the ballroom so conversation could have dignity. The staff cafeteria was moved to a room with a view. Lunch tasted better. The service elevator got a new heart, and Maria stopped taking the stairs, with baskets heavy enough to bend her spine. On the morning the atrium glass went up, Malik stood at ground level and looked toward the sky. The panes were held by slender ribs of steel that disappeared if you stared long enough, leaving only ocean and blue and the kind of light that makes you forgive a lot. Maria slipped her hand into his. "My mother back in Cuba used to say the sky is a quilt," she murmured. "Looks soft, keeps you warm. You made one in here." He laughed, not because it was funny, but because joy needed a way out. "I only listened to what the building was asking." "Maybe it was asking for you," she said. He turned then and kissed her the way you kiss someone who has walked into the fire with you and come out laughing. It wasn't dramatic. It felt like a fact that had finally said itself. Months passed in the kind of hurry that only happens when something is finally right. Workers who had never been asked what they thought found their suggestions on diagrams. Stephen learned to say, "What does the team think?" and mean it. Halberg came by and stood in corners testing the air like a fussing grandfather. One late afternoon they held a small ceremony to unveil a plaque in the ballroom. The same space where Malik had been mocked now wore new light like it owned the past and the future. The plaque read, "Designed and restored by Malik Johnson, architect." The word he loved had come home to sit beside his name. He touched the brass as if it might be warm. At the reopening gala, he did something odd. He asked them to play the humiliating video before any speeches. On the screen, his old self stood in a vest and bow tie, eyes trained to steady, while laughter sloshed around him. The video faded to black, and a single line of white text appeared. The man they laughed at rebuilt everything they stood on. No one applauded. The quiet had too much weight for clapping. Then someone started, and then the room followed, and Malik walked to the microphone without a paper in his hand. "A few months ago, he said, I served wine to men who laughed at my hands. Today these hands hold the keys to a future where we stop mistaking uniforms for limits." He paused, the old ache in his voice folding into something new. "I used to hide. I thought that was safer. But when you hide long enough, your gift goes looking for a different home. I don't want any young person to learn that lesson the hard way. I don't want any building to go on breathing badly because the person who could fix it is behind a bar pretending he doesn't know how." Afterward, the press wanted quotes, and he gave them a few. He let the cameras see him beside Maria once, her fingers laced with his. He answered a reporter who asked if he was angry. "Not today," he said. "Today I'm busy." He was offered morning show spots he declined and consulting gigs he accepted or didn't, depending on whether the people asking had learned how to listen. He took long walks through the resort in the early dawn with a notebook he no longer had to hide. He liked to stop in the staff cafeteria and ask the cooks how the vent hood was working and whether the new shelving made their backs hurt less. He made sure the first raise the board approved went to housekeeping. On a quiet evening when the heat softened and the sky considered rain, he and Maria sat on a bench along the deck he'd designed. The ocean lifted and set itself down, lifted and set itself down. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you remember the day in the locker room?" she asked. "The video. The way you looked at the floor like you were measuring the distance to something you couldn't reach?" "I remember wanting to be small enough not to feel it," he said. She took his hand. "I remember wanting to lift you," she answered. "I didn't know how heavy you were. Turns out, you float." "I float because you taught me," he said. They watched as the lights along the atrium ribs came on one by one, like a constellation figuring itself out. The building that had been old and ashamed now stood like an elder who had told the truth and been forgiven. Word traveled the way stories do when people are hungry for better endings. Former clients reached out to say they'd always believed in him, and he learned the art of meeting those words with grace that did not bend into resentment. A state board stamped and returned paperwork that began the process of restoring his license. A statewide newspaper did a Sunday feature titled Blueprints and Second Chances. The piece closed with a photo of Malik standing under the atrium glass, his mother's yellow dress visible in a framed picture on a shelf behind the reception desk, and Maria by his side, laughing at something the photographer had said that had not been funny. The Clearwater Resort thrived not in an overnight miracle way, but in the slow, credible way buildings do when their bones are respected. Guests came back not because the place looked expensive, but because it felt honest. Weddings filled weekends, family reunions brought back folks who hadn't spoken in a decade and now found themselves talking under a roof that knew how to hold tenderness. The staff came to work with a different posture. It turned out dignity is as contagious as laughter. On the anniversary of the grand reopening, the board gathered on the deck at sunset. The air was light and kind. Halberg held up a small folder. "One last order of business," he said. "The board has voted to grant Mr. Johnson a 10% ownership stake in the resort. In our view, anyone who saves a home ought to own a piece of it." Papers passed, pens moved, and the law caught up to what the heart already knew. Malik shook hands and thanked people, and then went looking for Maria because the only person he wanted to tell first was the one who had believed earliest. He found her in the laundry, laughing with the crew. He apologized for interrupting and told her the news, and she pressed her forehead to his chest and whispered something in Spanish that sounded like a prayer and a joke. Later, they sat again on their bench with 2 small paper cups of soft serve from the staff cafeteria vanilla for her, twist for him, and he said, "Do you ever think about what we owe the people who didn't believe?" She thought. "We owe them a good night's sleep," she said, "because you built a building that helps them breathe." He laughed. He looked at her and didn't know how to say thank you without saying it 1,000 times. So he kissed her knuckles and said, "Walk with me." And they walked the long hall where the air glided and the floor felt certain underfoot, and the windows let in the soft, salt evening. There would be hard days again, there always are. Permits get stubborn. Budgets argue. Old scars ache in hurricane weather. But the shape of the story had changed. And when the shape of a story changes, people inside it stand a little taller. A boy came to the resort on a field trip that fall, part of a charter school program that toured places where people worked with their hands and minds. He was thin and quiet and kept his hood up even inside. Malik noticed the way the boy's eyes moved, not at the lobby fountain or the sugary pastry table, but at the vents, the corners, the ribs of glass overhead. Malik pulled a napkin from his pocket and a pencil from behind his ear and drew a simple cross-section of the atrium on the napkin, labeling the path air took through the space. He handed it to the boy. "You can keep this," he said. The boy looked from the paper to Malik to the ceiling, as if measuring the distance between a waiter and an architect, and discovering there wasn't one. "I'm not a waiter anymore," Malik said softly, hearing the boy's unasked question. "But I used to be. It was good work. This is good work, too. You can do both kinds in one life if you need to." The boy nodded like he'd been planning on it anyway. That night, Malik tucked a clean packet of cocktail napkins into his pocket out of habit. He still kept a pencil behind his ear. He still walked the building before dawn. He still drew when the world was too loud. Not because he needed proof that he belonged. He had the plaque and the stake and the license on the way for that. He did it because a man who loves the hidden working of things doesn't stop listening when the applause dies. He keeps showing up. He keeps building in the quiet. And if you were there on a Sunday morning, early enough to catch the first pink of day dressing the glass, you might see him standing alone in the atrium, looking up as if the sky were saying his name back to him. You might not recognize him as the man from the video or the headline. You would see an architect who once served drinks and still serves something, a reminder that greatness often arrives dressed in uniforms that make other people comfortable. You would also see a housekeeper walking toward him, her hand already reaching for his, and two people who knew that miracles don't always look like lightning. Sometimes they look like a pencil on a napkin, a manager willing to listen, an investor who says partnership, a building that admits where it hurts, and a man who refuses to let his gift go homeless. They stood that way a long time, two silhouettes under a quilt of glass, while the ocean kept its promise to come and go, and the building kept its promise to stand, and the future, at last, felt roomy. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you not to judge by uniforms or titles, or to keep protecting the gift inside you until the world is ready to meet it, share the moment that hit you hardest in the comments and consider subscribing. Somewhere, someone is sketching a better future on the back of a napkin. Let's make sure they're seen.